Welcome. I am Karen Gill, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. On behalf of the college and the university, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this special occasion. We are thrilled to have John Kao and Gary White with us tonight as the newest Frey Foundation Distinguished Visiting Professors in the College of Arts and Sciences. And we are very honored to have our Chancellor Holden Thorp help foster the discussion tonight. The Frey Foundation Visiting Distinguished Professorships are among the highest honors awarded annually in the College of Arts and Sciences. These visiting professorships give us an opportunity to invite distinguished public leaders in the U.S. and in the world to come to Chapel Hill to share their ideas. This is the 19th year that we've been able to provide these exciting discussions. And all of this is made possible by David Frey, a Carolina graduate and longtime supporter of the college, and his wife, Judy. David chairs the Edward J. and Frances Frey Foundation, which made a major gift to the college and helps us support this program. We are very grateful to David and the Frey Foundation and to Judy. They are here tonight, so please join me in thanking them. Really, thank you, David and Judy. Tonight's conversation focuses on changing the world through innovation. Innovation is embedded in the mission of the College of Arts and Sciences and in the university. Our campus really is a hub of innovative learning, discovery, and engagement. Our students and our faculty work together to advance knowledge and to address the greatest problems that we are facing today in North Carolina and indeed in the world. In the College of Arts and Sciences, we have a minor in entrepreneurship. Some of the faculty from that minor are here tonight, as well as the director of the minor. In this minor, we engage and inspire liberal arts and sciences students to think and act entrepreneurially, no matter what their field or what they choose to do for their life's work. We're also developing a number of new courses across the curriculum on entrepreneurship. One was taught in this room this year by several people who are here. Our chancellor was one of the instructors, Buck Goldstein, John Aiken. In this class, everything about it was entrepreneurial and innovative. Its design, its technology, it even had music at the beginning of each lecture. All of the assignments and the projects were innovative, the roster of entrepreneurial guests. So throughout the university, we really have worked to foster a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. John Kao, Gary White, and Holden Thorp are leaders of innovation, and we brought them together this evening to have this really exciting discussion. Chancellor Thorp will introduce our guests in just a moment, but before he does, I wanted to just say a few words about him. Holden is really an inspiring, innovative teacher, scientist, and leader, not only on our campus, but really across public higher education. He is a charter fellow in the National Academy of Inventors. He serves on President Obama's National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship. At Carolina here, he started Innovate at Carolina, an initiative that helps embed innovative practices throughout our campus. With Buck Goldstein, who's right here today, he co-authored a book, which I think I saw him holding before, called Engines of Innovation, about being an entrepreneurial, innovative university. Holden will leave us in June to become provost at Washington University in St. Louis, but he will leave behind the colleagues, students, and programs he inspired, the things that really will continue to transform our university and the world for generations to come. So let's thank Holden for leading the discussion tonight. And for all.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you all for being here. This is a fun night that we've all been looking forward to. And I've taught in this room many times before, but never with plants. So very excited. David, these plants are for you. When I teach here, there's no plants showing up. So I'm very excited about that. It is an honor to be here, and David and Judy, thank you for all you have done for Carolina and for Patty and me. We so value our friendship and relationship with you. And it's an honor to be here with John Kao and Gary White. They have the knowledge and experience to talk about tonight's topic. In fact, they're already doing, they already are changing the world through innovation, as we all are. As Karen said, at Carolina we encourage faculty and students to have a deep desire to advance knowledge and address the big problems of the world. We're connecting the dots between what goes on in the classroom, the laboratory, and the field. And so what we do here today can be applied to some of the world's greatest challenges tomorrow. We also believe that having our students and our faculty work together on big problems is the best preparation for work and leadership in our fast-changing society. And that's why we want to inspire our students to think and act entrepreneurially and to be creative problem solvers regardless of their chosen major or field. So that's why at Carolina we are educating entrepreneurial students in all areas across all the professions, the sciences, and the liberal arts. And I'd like to tell you about our newest entrepreneur in residence, Dennis Whittle, who is the Richards Donahoe Social Entrepreneur in Residence. Dennis is on campus today, but I don't see him here yet. I think that was him. Dennis graduated from Carolina with a degree in religious studies, and he co-founded Global Giving, a pioneering online marketplace that has revolutionized global philanthropy. And I've heard him say, as recently as last night, that he learned to think entrepreneurially from UNC Religious Studies professor Brule Tyson, who was certainly one of the most innovative and entrepreneurial faculty members we've ever had. Now let me tell you about our newest Frey Foundation Distinguished Visiting Professors in the College of Arts and Sciences. First, John Kao is a highly successful and well-rounded liberal arts graduate. He has a BA from Yale, where he majored in philosophy. And he also developed an interest in the behavioral sciences and went on to earn an MD in psychiatry from Yale School of Medicine and then an MBA from Harvard. While he was still in his first year of business school at Harvard, he was hired to teach there, where he remained a faculty member for 14 years. He is also a jazz pianist and spent the summer of 1969 playing keyboards for Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. So later on this evening, we'll be hearing selections from Burnt Weenie Sandwich and Uncle Nick. Huh? You played on Burnt Weenie Sandwich? Sleeping in a jar? Not sleeping in a jar? That's, yeah. Okay, we're not going to go through all that right now. Those of us who either live in the past or remember it can be thinking about Frank Zappa right now. John is a globally recognized authority on innovation and organizational transformation. He is the author of the best-selling book, Innovation Nation, How America is Losing Its Innovation Edge, Why It Matters, and What We Can Do to Get It Back, which was a big inspiration to Buck and me, who is carrying our book today because we're marking it up for the paperback edition. And he's also the author of Jamming, the art and discipline of business creativity, which brings jazz music and business creativity together. And he handed me this book a few hours ago, and I have been carrying it around because I'm so happy this book exists, and I'm going to read it as soon as I have a chance. He's the chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Advisory Council on Innovation and of the Institute for Large-Scale Innovation, an association of national innovation leaders from around the world. Now let me tell you about UNC alumnus Gary White. This year, because of our campus-wide initiative exploring water in our world, the college was eager to award a Frey Foundation Distinguished Visiting Professorship to a global recognized leader in efforts to address the water crisis. Gary White, a visionary social entrepreneur, was an obvious choice. He is Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Water.org, a nonprofit organization formed in partnership with another organization founded by actor Matt Damon. Water.org is dedicated to empowering people in the developing world to gain access to sustainable water and sanitation systems. Gary's leadership has driven innovations in the way water projects are delivered and financed. To date, Water.org has served 1 million people, and its innovations have become models for the rest of the world. Gary has won numerous honors, including being named to Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential people in the world. Last year, the World Social Impact Award from the World Policy Institute was awarded to Gary, and he was named one of the Schwab Foundation Social Entrepreneurs of the Year. He was inducted into the Philanthropy World Hall of Fame and has become an advisor to the Clinton Global Initiatives. He received a Master's in Environmental Sciences and Engineering from UNC's Gilling School of Global Public Health. The School of Public Health Alumni Association awarded him its highest honor, a Distinguished Alumnus Award in 2002. Let's give John and Gary a warm Carolina. We'll start off by having each of them give brief introductory remarks, and then we'll engage in a conversation, including questions from you. We'll start with John.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you and at this storied institution, which is rapidly, I think, becoming recognized as an innovation hotspot. It's particularly interesting for me to touch base with some of the students this afternoon, as well as the faculty, since I'm now immersed, as are, I think, thousands of other people in e-education startups that have to do with trying to foster innovation and entrepreneurial skills in a younger cohort. My target audience happens to be teenagers, so the people who will be coming here in a few years. I just want to make a few points. We were asked to spend 10 minutes making opening remarks. Back in 1983, when I was a newly minted assistant professor at a well-known Eastern business school, I went in to get some advice from one of my senior colleagues. It was kind of like a Hollywood central casting image of a senior professor, white hair, a desk that was about the size of the USS Enterprise. And I remember walking into his office and saying, I think I want to teach a course on innovation and entrepreneurship. Especially innovation. There's a reason why I'm attracted to going out to San Francisco. There are these companies like Apple and Activision and so forth and so on. And there was this long and very uncomfortable silence. I won't mention this guy's name, but after which he looked at me and he said, "You want to get promoted, don't you?" Now, what I said, I was a little dumbfounded. I said, "Well, I've just been here for a year. I don't know. It sounds pretty good, this promotion thing. Why do you ask?" And he looked at me and he said, "Look, let me set you straight. Innovation is not a great subject for you to be teaching during your probably very short career here." And I said, "Well, why is that? Practicing the 5 whys." And he said, "Look, let me tell you, everything important about the subject of innovation has already been published in the literature." True story. And this is when I knew I was onto a great topic. So I've spent probably the last 30 years, a big chunk of the last 30 years, toiling in the vineyards of innovation and looking at it in a number of different ways. And during that period of time, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of innovation. One of the things that is inescapable when you are in the field, so to speak, and by the way, I don't believe that it is a field yet, although I'm hoping it will be a field, but one of the things you observe is that the word is used an extraordinarily with extraordinary frequency. If you go on Google and ask for the number of hits over the last 12 months for the word innovation, you'll get something on the order of 300 or 400 million hits, right? Which is the good news and the bad news. The good news is people think it's important. The bad news is the word is used so often that it threatens to descend into almost meaninglessness. So if there's one thing that I can share with you in my remaining 6.5 minutes, it's to try to create a little bit of coherence around the topic of innovation. The dictionary defines innovation as creativity applied to a purpose to realize value. And I thought that was a pretty good definition until I started hanging out with people who were running innovation in countries as opposed to companies. And I started becoming aware of people like Gary who were changing the world through innovation. And I said to myself, there's got to be a better definition. So the one that I use is innovation is the set of capabilities. In other words, it's a verb, not a noun. It's an active process. The set of capabilities that allows for the realization of a desired future. To me, innovation has to be about purpose. Otherwise, if you just do a few new things, they could have value, but you get variety, not transformation, not the execution around some big sense of purpose. And these days, given the state of the world, innovation in the interest of global civil society, I think, could not be a more important issue. One of the reasons why I set up this Institute for Large-Scale Innovation, it was a little garage project where I thought, well, I'll get half a dozen people I know who are running innovation in their home country, Finland, Singapore, Canada, et cetera, and we'll have a meeting. And we'll talk about what it means to lead innovation in a country. That was 3 years ago. Beware of what you wish for. Fast forward to today, there are 46 countries in the network. It's becoming a powerful way to address what I consider to be an important question these days, which is, and I'll throw the question out to you, if you were the Chief Innovation Officer of the world, what would you do? How would you do it? What do you need? You know, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we're just getting our minds around the notion that innovation and innovation-related challenges, you know, they're not Chinese problems or American problems or Australian problems. They're human problems, but yet there is no voice for innovation and innovation policy at a global level. So this, you know, becomes, I think, quite important. Now, innovation's hard to talk about in a way because it's a complex phenomenon. It's not invention. You know, Edison, when he invented the first light bulb, was not an innovator, really, and by my sense of the technical definition. He was an innovator when he started selling lots and lots of light bulbs, right? So, and innovation is not entrepreneurship. You know, to me, innovation is the process that goes from the inspiration, the generation of the new idea, all the way to the execution and the realization of value in the marketplace, within which the entrepreneur is the person who is able to drive that idea or to join a process that leads to that realization of value. Right? So the entrepreneur may not even be the person who comes up with the big idea. They may be part of a team that has originated the idea, but that now needs somebody to go from, you know, the 45th yard line all the way to the goal zone. I mean, who knows, right? But they're not exactly the same thing. So it is important to have a critical sense of what entrepreneurship is, and innovation are, because, China is spending, supposedly, $500 billion on their national innovation agenda, right? I wonder how they define it relative to how we define it, relative to how other countries define it. Wouldn't it be great to have some alignment around what innovation is? Now, there are other reasons why it's complex. Steve Jobs was a great innovator. Apple's an innovative company. It started in the Bay Area, which is an innovative place. Okay, so right there, you've got psychology, organizational behavior, economics, and social policy all wrapped into one. It's not just somebody sitting in a room with a little light bulb over their head. There are a lot of different nuances to it. And also, the way we talk about innovation is conditioned by the business model that we have in our minds. So in the industrial era, innovation was obviously really important because you had to innovate your way into a model of mass production and improvement, right? Kaizen, all that stuff. But then, beginning around the 60s, early 70s, you get Silicon Valley, venture capital, killer apps, and the whole host of innovative things that occurred there. Mostly driven by an appreciation of emerging technologies. And for me, there's a third wave of innovation that's now breaking onto the shores, which is, you could call it human-centered innovation. So when you look at crowdsourced innovation and idea markets and design thinking and a lot of the innovations about innovation that are occurring, they all, in a sense, come back to human beings and their experience, right? So it's away from the killer app back to human beings. It's like design thinkers being the ethnographers who go out and observe behavior and make inferences and try to figure out, in so doing, what people might not just find sufficient for their daily activities, but what they would find delightful. So this is a plea, in a sense, for a sharper rhetoric around innovation, right? Because I hear loose talk all the time. When somebody says, oh, you're the innovation guy, my first question is, well, what do you mean by innovation? Because until that's clarified, it is impossible to have a good conversation. It's impossible to kind of know where we are. And that is the dilemma of innovation as a field. So my belief right now is that innovation is not yet a field. If you're familiar with the structure of scientific revolutions, we're in the hand-waving phase of building disconfirming evidence about how the existing models don't work anymore, existing ways of doing things, whether they be in healthcare or education or, whatever, are being questioned, right? So the anomalous findings, the sort of rebellious thinkers, the need for metaphorical language to describe a phenomenon that it's hard to be precise about. I believe this is a fateful decade for innovation. I believe that over the next 10 years, it will become more like a field. There will become more commonly accepted definitions. There will be more alignment around best practices. It will become more pervasive. And I believe technology will play a big role in that. I believe that what we're seeing now in terms of crowdsourcing, idea markets, the ability to shape global conversations around ideation, development, and the realization of value becomes, in a sense, a pathway to innovation becoming more objective, a practice that more people can put their hands on more routinely, and lead to this notion that, in fact, when you talk about innovation leadership, innovation management, it's actually going to mean something. Thanks.
No, great, thanks.
First of all, thanks for hosting us here for this. It's great to be back at Carolina and to be back in this context in particular, to see so many familiar faces and to talk about kind of a little bit about my journey. It's been almost 20 years, I guess, since I left here, and how that intersects with innovation and with entrepreneurship. And I want to do that just through 4 short vignettes that really help illustrate, I think, this concept that you're talking about, John. It's one thing to innovate, but it's one other thing to wrap something entrepreneurial around it and have it drive value in the world. So I have those 4 short vignettes, but before I do that, I wanted to just show a short video, because all this is built on the fact that this global water sanitation crisis is massive, and it's something that's faced humanity for centuries, and we still haven't got it solved yet. And so the video just kind of gives a really brief overview of the issue and some of the things that we're doing to solve it, and then I'll dive into those vignettes. So if we can go ahead and cue the video.
If you don't know about the water crisis, you should. 2.6 billion people are affected. They lack clean water and a toilet. Each day, kids miss school, moms walk miles, families get sick from unsafe water, and too many die. Over 4,000 kids every day.
For those days we felt like a mistake.
We all know this is wrong, it's tragic, and it's totally unnecessary, because it's solvable, if done right and with urgency. At water.org, we are dedicated to solving the global water crisis. Our more than 25 years of experience has given us insight. We know the water crisis can't be solved by a one-size-fits-all approach. We know it's not just about drilling wells, and that charity alone won't ever solve the challenge. To us, people in poverty are citizens and customers with rights and economic power, not just people in need of a handout. They want to determine their own future. Our role is to make this happen. So we go to communities who ask for help. With our local partners, we tailor programs to meet their needs. We engage innovative supporters. We bring in new sources of capital. Our solutions are built to last and must extend to other places quickly. And we develop game-changing ideas. One idea we pioneered is water credit. Water credit is a small loan for a family or community to get a water connection or a toilet. We convinced banks to make loans that weren't being made by sharing the financial risk with them. This brought new funds to people in need. And guess what? The idea works. And as the loans are being paid back, the money is recycled to others in need. Water credit is taking off around the world because it benefits more people faster. That makes it a solution critical to ending the crisis. Look, we have to be bold to solve the water crisis. Ensuring that everyone has safe drinking water and the dignity of a toilet is one of humanity's most urgent problems. The water crisis is complex, and we understand it. Let us work on your behalf, proudly. At water.org, we're dedicated to solving the water crisis in our lifetime. You can help make this happen. Join us.
So that gives you a little bit of the context of the challenge that we're tackling. And it kind of leads right into my first vignette, and that is this whole concept of the democratization of capital. With innovation and entrepreneurship, it's not about creating a new idea from scratch. It's really about kind of building on other people's ideas and helping, complete someone else's thoughts or someone completes your thoughts. And it's what I call nudges. And when you look at this whole force of democratization of capital, which really takes form in the shape of microfinance, and Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize for this concept that microfinance is hovering out there, but we in the water sector really weren't tuned into it. And yet I knew from traveling in the slums of India and Kibera in Africa that there were people going to loan sharks and taking out loans for 125% interest so they could build a toilet. There are people buying water from what's sometimes called the water mafia, who distributes water in slums, and that water was costing people anywhere from 7 to 15 times more per liter of water than if they had a house connection from the utility. So we knew that there was this incredible demand, we knew that there was a market, and yet the microfinance institutions wouldn't lend for water and sanitation because they didn't see it as traditional, like you would get a loan for a sewing machine and be sewing clothes and repaying your loan, or a loan for a cow, and the next day, you're selling the milk. So we had to nudge the whole democratization of capital into the water and sanitation space because we knew that people were paying huge amounts in terms of their time that they could spend working as opposed to scavenging for water and what they were paying loan sharks and so on. So we brought the microfinance sector into water and sanitation, and it worked. And the bottom line is that now we've been able to reach about 600,000 people with loans instead of using a charity top-down approach. And what we've also done is take about $15 million in philanthropic capital now and turn that into about $50 million in commercial capital that will now be used to help people living in poverty get water and sanitation instead of trying to find $50 million in philanthropy to do that. Because the bottom line is we're never going to have enough charity in the world to solve this problem. So let's look at these innovations. The second vignette is really around the democratization of information. And this is much more of a hypothesis for us at this point. But we know that the 780 million people roughly that don't have water and 2.5 billion that don't have sanitation, they won't all be able to benefit from water credit. There are some people in the world who are so poor that this just won't work. So how do we help these people discover the intrinsic power they have, not so much as customers, but as citizens? How do we take the lessons of social media, the access to information and communication technology that we saw in the Arab Spring and bend that? Again, it's a nudge, right? How do we bend that issue of people finding their democratic voice into finding their voice around water and sanitation through greater accountability and transparency? So that's another example, I think, that if we can help people discover this intrinsic power, put the pressure on their leaders, on their utilities, for the investments that are supposed to be made to help them, that aren't binding them, how can we nudge that system closer to people at the base of the pyramid? So that's what we're working on now, in addition to water credit and what's happening there. The third vignette with respect to innovation is how we raise funds. So we created something we call our New Ventures Fund, which is akin to a venture capital fund that you might see in Silicon Valley. The challenge was when we wanted to go out and try something new like water credit or like these nudges towards greater accountability and transparency, the cycle time for a nonprofit to go and get funding for that can be anywhere from 18 months to 24 months. And nothing kills innovation like waiting 2 years to kind of light up your good idea. So what we did was create a New Ventures Fund and basically brought donors into that fund. We targeted 7-figure investors into the fund. It's a purely philanthropic fund, but we talk about it as if it's a venture fund because that's what we're trying to spur these kinds of ideas. And so what we found is that if you come in with a New Venture Fund, you can seed a water credit. You can seed these activities around accountability and transparency with a few $100,000. And then what that does, it gives you proof of concept so that you can go and land the multi-million-dollar grants. So right now we're doing this with PepsiCo and Caterpillar, for instance, by investing a few $100,000 up front with different projects in India, South America, and Indonesia, we've then been able to secure an $8 million grant from PepsiCo and a $3 million grant from Caterpillar and another $3 million from the MasterCard Foundation. So basically what we're able to do is match the risk-reward profile. High net worth individuals will place risky bets, and if we fail, it's not the end of the world. If you go to a mainstream foundation, you don't want to fail, right? So the different risk-reward profile. So that's the other innovation. And the final vignette is around how do we tell the story? How do we do fundraising and advocacy in the U.S. in what I call the upstream? And that is something that has just really taken shape in the last few weeks. I don't know if any of you have tuned into Matt Damon's toilet strike or not, but we did a comedic video where Matt is going on strike from the toilet. And he's not going to go to the toilet until everyone in the world gets safe water and sanitation. And we launched this with kind of a faux press conference a few weeks ago. And what we also did was build in other celebrities. So pretty soon you'll see Bono doing a response, giving Matt advice. You'll see lots of other celebrities coming through as well. What we did that was really innovative is we matched it with video bloggers or vloggers. And I think that I didn't really know much about vlogging, but these guys come with subscribers in the tens of millions. And so what we've been able to do, where in the past, the traditional way we've taken with this is having Matt do a serious video, having Jodie Foster do a voiceover. And what's happened is we've got a stunning 60 or 70,000 views for those videos. With the toilet strike now, and with other celebrities coming on board, this is just the start, in the first 2 weeks of the campaign, we've had over 6 million views of this. People are engaged. They're thinking about global sanitation for the first time in their lives. And we're hoping that we can then take that mobilization around advocacy and turn it into many more people getting access to water. So those are just 4 short vignettes of how we're trying to not just do innovation, but also bring that over into really entrepreneurial impact in the world.
So, fantastic. So I'll start off with a few questions and then we'll open them up to the audience. So John, in your book, you talk about the wicked problems. And I can't think of a better example than water, but there are a lot of others. So if you would talk a little bit about this whole wicked problems idea and how you think water kind of fits in the rubric you developed. And then Gary, if you could kind of let us know how you think about bringing all the different disciplines that are required to solve the water problem together.
So wicked problems was actually a term invented by Horace Riddle, who was a political scientist about 3 or 4 decades ago, in his work to try to examine why some problems seemed insoluble, they were intractable. And so he came up with this notion of wicked as opposed to tame problems. You know, a tame problem is my car makes noise, it's smoking, I have to replace it, I do comparative research, I test drive a couple, I make a choice, I'm finished, I've solved the problem, it's Miller time, right? A wicked problem is one in which there is so much complexity and so many different stakeholders with different views of the problem that it's almost impossible to even define the problem in a way that people will agree with, let alone agree on success measures. And you don't really solve wicked problems, you make them better, hopefully, you mitigate them, but it's not as though there's a clear endpoint, like the victory parade. The reason that the wicked problems notion is really important is because a lot of us, either tacitly or explicitly, have been trained to solve problems in a certain way. You know, if you're an engineering student, there's a rational waterfall method where you describe the problem and you try different options out and you narrow things down and you decide and you're done. But for a wicked problem, Horace Riddle said that the only way to address a wicked problem is to get all the stakeholders of the problem in a room and employ a lot of creative facilitation. So if you think about what designers do, for instance, designers in their design studios with Post-it notes all over the wall, one-room schoolhouse kind of phenomenon, are very much about taking all the elements of a complex issue, like, what's the future of X, where X could be educational devices or medical devices or service businesses or whatever, and combine all of the knowledge in one place so they can begin to think about it in a holistic way and activate, by the way, different elements of the multiple intelligences framework. So the analytical intelligence may be, the traditional waterfall, but how about spatial intelligence? How about using sort of intuition to connect disparate facts and try to figure out something new? So it kind of begs us to consider that there are different approaches to addressing challenges that we may not be as good at teaching or imparting as the traditional model. And that, in a way, intractable problems turn on their head, become, wicked problems turn on their head, become wicked opportunities.
So I think the concept of a wicked problem, like water and sanitation, definitely fits the category. I think you can try to kind of come up with the grand solution, or you can take bite-sized pieces of it. And even if you're taking a bite-sized piece, to your point, you have to integrate different organizations, different ways of thinking. And certainly that's what we try to do. But we also recognize that there's a lot kind of happening from the top down in terms of what governments are doing, the World Bank is doing, UN. Those things are important. Reforming kind of the policy within governments is important. But that's not kind of where, as a smallish kind of NGO, we choose to join the fight. It's really kind of looking at these, how can we swim within the slipstream of natural forces, like market forces, like the fact that the poor really are customers, but there really is this market failure around getting them access to finance, and nudge the system in those directions. And so to that extent, it's not so much about engineering, for instance, which is why, I came here to study engineering, right? And I discovered, from Don Laurie and Dale Whittington and Dan Oken and others, that there's a lot more economics and finance into this. And so you kind of start seeing again, you got to get outside of the area that you're focusing on and find what I call these orthogonal forces that are out there and bend them towards solving the problem. And that's where the partnership comes in. That's where the collaboration comes in. So instead of us going out and creating new microfinance institutions, which would have been a real inefficient use of our time, we just kind of worked and talked and nudged until we were blue in the face, until microfinance institutions would come on board. And now we have 25 microfinance institution partners around the world that are doing this. And so it's all about building in those types of unexpected collaborations rather than working with like a lot of engineering firms to just go build more pipes.
Right. And so I think as we think about the university, and you alluded to this when your senior colleague was suggesting that you not go into innovation. We're really, really good at training people in narrow disciplines. And that's incredibly important because you need people who know economics and who know engineering and who know public policy and all those things. But the world is asking us, and I think many of our students are called to be broad in the way that the two of you are. So how do we evolve higher education so that we don't lose this extraordinary thing that we built for 500 years, which is the ability to learn and study something and develop deep expertise, but still position ourselves and position our graduates to work on these topics so that if a bright young assistant professor wants to study innovation, they don't get told that that's not a good thing to work on, which I assume happened because I don't think business schools have developed a good journal.
Well, he was trying to save me for doing cases on General Electric and the car industry, which I didn't particularly want to do at that time because there were other more interesting things. Well, I think it begs the question of what's the learning model. If the learning model is authority figures sitting in front of masses of students and imparting knowledge that they stick in their heads and then are tested on, that may or may not, that probably is not a good fit with an innovation economy. So you sort of think about jazz, you think about, which I know you're a big fan of, and When I went on my jazz journey, I actually did what any good recovering academic would do. I went out and bought a lot of theory books and tried to study them. And that got me about this far. Then I went to some authorities and took some lessons, and that was sort of helpful. But what was really helpful was to just get in a room with other jazz musicians and start mixing it up and start playing and trying it out and taking a risk. So, you know, this is back to Minton's Club in New York in the 60s and 70s, where after you played your regular gig, you'd show up and you'd have these all-night jam sessions, which were affectionately named cutting sessions, as in cut you off the stage, cut you off at the knees, I'm better than you. And I don't mean to suggest that a vicious kind of competition is part of the project-based learning thing, but the idea of putting your ideas on stage in front of others, multi-generational kind of models, mentoring models, hackathons, you know, lean startup weekends, all these kinds of things are where you actually share knowledge about how to do stuff, as opposed to knowledge about doing things, which is still one step removed. So I think that, you know, and we had a bit of this conversation earlier, that, you know, it's clear that the university has a role to play, a very important role to play for the duration, despite a kind of a fashionable anti-institutional bias, which seems to be creeping in to sort of advance thinking about next generation, you know, e-learning and things like that, you know, which is who needs institutions. But the question of what the institution is about, you know, I think is open for an interesting discussion. I mean, is it a container for supporting collaboration within a community and reinforcing proximity? You know, Marissa Mayer just told everybody at Yahoo, you know, something revolutionary, which is they have to come into work in the morning. You know, they can't stay home in their PJs and, you know, kind of surf the web or whatever it is that they might be doing in their, you know, kind of untethered time. So, you know, the university, I mean, smart universities to me get that they are now in play and that they are laboratories and that they're, you know, the wicked problem of what to do with higher education actually for some people is a wicked opportunity.
Right. Yeah, I think you walk a fine line with this between trying to structure it, impart it, and instill it versus just nurturing it and kind of let it happen. And I think that there are positive, constructive ways to embed it in higher education. I think you look at the Skoll Foundation, and what they've done was really trying to create a rigorous discipline around social entrepreneurship with kind of the flagship program at the Oxford Science Business School, which I think is a really great example to take a page from that. But on the other hand, you don't want to go too far in that direction, because it's going to happen regardless. I mean, the students we were meeting with this afternoon, I mean, it's already happening here. That innovation is happening. It is going out into that area of probing around entrepreneurship. And I think that I just, you know, again, comparing where I was here, you know, in 1990 with what's there now, and what it meant to be a social entrepreneur then. I had no idea I was a social entrepreneur, but the only tools I had to me to try to kind of start up something that was focusing on a big social problem was like a fundraising dinner, you know, at the Moorhead Planetarium. I mean, that's what you did then. You got up on your soapbox and you told your story and you raised money. We raised like a few $1,000s, and we did water projects. And that was a very blunt instrument of somebody who was a social entrepreneur to try to work through that. And we did it, you know, we persisted, we worked hard, and we're tenacious. And then after 2 years, I got my first paycheck of $100 a month. You know, it just happened so slowly. Now, there is the opportunity with Kickstarter, you know, with ideas floating around Google, with access to information about the problems, and not just the problems and the information, but the data and the insights that you can glean from what's out there, and the ability to crowdsource. All of these things are really almost make it inevitable that people that have that spark of entrepreneurship in them are going to find their path, and that's going to multiply across social problems that are out there, and it will happen. Now, I think the university can facilitate and nurture that and make it even more efficient or effective, but it's going to happen.
Right. Well, let's open it up to some questions for the audience. I'm sure there are some, and I think there's people sitting down front enough, and the acoustics in this room are good enough that you can just say your question, and if I need to repeat it, I will. Okay, Chris?
I believe that we're missing an element in many universities, which is a technical staff. We have office staffs, we have graduate students, we have undergraduate researchers, postdocs. I believe that we're missing in many departments on this campus a technical staff that's able to help faculty members and students get it together, given that the time and so forth. I'm curious about your view of universities here, institutions here, versus institutions that have good technical staff. So I'm thinking, for example, of ETH in Switzerland, places where there are well-established technical staffs that are valued and paid well, by the way.
Can you give me an example of what a technical staff here would do?
Well, for example, in my group 20 years ago, I chose to add engineering. I do marine chemistry. And so I have in my lab now the world's first underwater laser methane sensor that allows me to work on the oil crises, gas release crises in the Northern Gulf. Without that engineer, I would not have access to those technologies because we can talk to companies in Europe in the same language where some of those instruments are now available. So without that critical person, I wouldn't be able to do this research. That's what I mean, that kind of thing.
I'll just offer one data point. I did some advisory work about 3 years ago for a new university in Finland that actually was three old universities that were merged. And what the government decided to do, since these were public universities, was to merge the business school, the design school, and essentially the MIT engineering school of Finland into one institution that they initially were going to call the Innovation University, although they chickened out on that and decided to call it the Alvar Aalto University with a tip of the hat to the patron saint of Finnish design. But the point I think you're making is well taken, which is the blending. You know, the question is what are the blends that are really useful, right? So if a lot of what we're doing is technology-enabled innovation, you know, we need technology.
Does John need a battery? We all need a battery. Yeah. Okay, we'll get you a battery. You know, you do everything in life, and sometimes a 9-volt battery is the key to everything. Yeah.
Gary, you and I and many people in this room know that developing countries are littered with lots of water and sanitation hardware that simply is dysfunctional. They're very capital intensive, hundreds of millions of dollars spent on hardware. And so that begs the question of sustainability. And sustainability is normally linked to institutional issues. Tell us about what water.org is thinking about doing with respect to innovative ways to come to grips with the sustainability issues in water and sanitation.
So I think the first thing we're doing is going to have the greatest impact, and that is instead of taking a traditional approach where all poor people are too poor to pay for a water or sanitation solution, we're seeing them at first as customers, and we're taking a demand responsive approach instead of a supply responsive approach. I mean, I've been in villages in Central America where everybody has 3 latrines. And why do they have 3 latrines? Because 3 different aid organizations came along giving away latrines. And so those are going to fail. Water projects are going to fail as long as they continue to really be this supply-driven type of approach. And I think that's what we need to build into this, to assume and segment the market, to know who are the people who are too poor and then do need kind of a subsidy-led approach from all the others who could really benefit from the market-based approach. And I think that really is the key to increasing sustainability of the programs.
Joe?
While we're on the water theme and thinking about poverty, North Carolina is home to more hogs than people. We have the equivalent of the city of Los Angeles on our coast without a sewage system and contaminating a lot of water and the fisheries and everything that stems from that. As you think about a wicked problem, you know, what do you think would be the sort of approaches for tackling a major initiative like that?
So clearly there are wicked problems domestically. And I think that the good news is, more than any other countries, perhaps with some exceptions in Europe, we have the frameworks and the policy and kind of the rule of law and the adjudication process to help sort these things out. But a lot of times it comes down to dollars and cents. And it's certainly, it's not a technology barrier, It's kind of, are we willing to put in the money that it costs to see the price of pork go up by whatever factor to be able to preserve, our waterways? And I think it's the same thing with global water supply writ large. I mean, yes, there's lots of wrangling to be done over our water resources in this country, but the fact is we're incredibly wealthy. The fact is that the average cable bill in this country costs twice our average water bill. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, think about how much you'd be willing to pay for the first gallon of water versus your first cable TV show. It's really the fact that we need to just come to grips, like with so many issues. We know our politics are a mess. We know that there are ways to solve it, but how do we get there and do it? I think, we've got to recognize that some of these things might cost more money, like if we have to desalinate water because water resources are running out in the coastal areas, then we'll pay the price to get that done. As long as there's enough will around protecting the waterways, then we'll apply the technology and pay a little bit more.
Yeah, Larry?
As Holden pointed out, the universities have been very effective at developing strong learning in increasingly narrow areas. And as a result, we've channeled funds, space, resources into a series of almost mutually exclusive groups. How do we break out of that? How do we actually promote the interaction and collaboration between groups without sacrificing the deep but fairly narrow strengths given these types of interdisciplinary wicked problems that we're discussing? Or do you have good examples of where that's been done? I can think of areas outside the university, but how about transporting those inside the university?
Well, I'll go back to the Alvar Aalto University, because they had that issue in spades, because they were also kind of trying to merge three schools with separate legacies and administrative staffs into one institution, if you can imagine, right? I mean, pretty complicated. And there are academic politics in Finland too, just in case you're wondering. So one thing was there was a cultural value that was stated that people should have what in the design world are called T-shaped skills, right? So the idea that you have a root in something, so you actually know a fair amount about something, but you also know a little bit about other things, and that allows you to dock with a lot of other kinds of people, right? So this whole notion that everybody should be a hyphenate, and with rare examples, I mean, look, if somebody's pursuing curiosity-based research in next generation oncology, cancer therapy, and they're doing great, don't bother them. But I mean, I think for a lot, having been in the life sciences to some extent, what I see, even among basic scientists, is a real appetite to engage with real-world issues, or at least to understand the policy implications of some of the things that they're involved with. Now, the way you break this down is you have to have a multi-pronged, battle plan. So in Finland, one of the things they did was they began to stress projects that were inherently I did case method teaching for 14 years. I can raise my voice. So sort of interdisciplinary problems that required interdisciplinary collaboration, and they provided funding for those projects, and very important, they created a different physical footprint at the university. So they had a whole bunch of essentially what they called labs, and the labs were based on essentially wicked opportunities, and they were multidisciplinary. So they had a service industry lab, and that was design, business, and technology all rolled into one. But it was also students and faculty, but it was also people from the inside and the outside, and there was funding attached and so forth and so on. So these were kind of like the launch pad type equivalents, but inside the university. And the president of the university, Tuula Terry, who herself is a kind of hyphenated academician, was a tireless evangelist for this new culture. I mean, how do you change culture in any organization? And the answer is very slowly. And so it requires a lot of effort. But I think incentives, and the other thing they did was they went to a blank piece of paper. So this would be a challenge, right? So they went to a blank piece of paper and reinvented the curriculum from day one through the interdisciplinary lens, saying you're not coming in as an engineer or a designer or a Helsinki School of Economics type of person. You're coming in as an Aalto University person. Now, what does that mean, right, in terms of what you need to learn? So you walk out with a kind of a blended skill set, right? And then they had to address issues of faculty advancement. You know, is this the Hatfields and the McCoys where, you know, the design faculty gets a few and the engineering faculty get a few, or do you actually start thinking about being one interdisciplinary university? So they are a very interesting existence proof of how to do it in an academic setting, and there are others.
So are you inserting the resources horizontally amongst those vertical organizations then, so that there's incentives for those strong disciplines to sign on to project-based resources?
It's a both and. You know, I mean, you're not going to, obviously, you know, any university would be well advised to keep applying to NIH for funding and, you know, do all the things that you normally do. But, you know, you become kind of like a matrix where, yes, horizontal funding, seed funding from internal sources, but also curiosity-based funding from corporate sponsors, other, you know, problem owners, NGO type of, you know, problem owners and stakeholders around these problems become extremely important. So you don't want to abandon this. I mean, I think disciplines are not going to go away. I mean, why would they? I mean, they're very, you know, they're fundamentally important. But the problem is that, you know, a university, you know, in a sense, as an institution, if you look at it almost from an ethnographic point of view, was designed to be specialized and siloed and focused and almost hermetic, you know, in terms of the compartments. But where the world wants us to go in terms of mashed up, blended knowledge, wicked problem, the ability to address wicked problems, and the ability to have the kind of agility, flexibility, salience, you know, ability to focus on new problems as they come up, you know, requires a different model, or at least an expansion of the existing model in a very significant way. Yeah.
So within the water and sanitation sector, where do you see the greatest need and the greatest potential for innovation? Would that be, do we need new hardware? Do we need new financial structures? Do we need some methods for behavioral change? Where is the greatest need and the greatest potential?
So with the problem, you know, so complex and so wicked, there's definitely the need to kind of attack it from a lot of different points of view. And policy top-down certainly is needed, and there's a lot that's happening in those areas, but that happens kind of slowly. I think the technology isn't a big issue to overcome with this, but I think it really is trying to figure out how do you help the poor become a market, and how do they get to this point. And so I think that the whole concept with water credit is just that we're in the second inning with this, right, relative to what it could be. I mean, we just finished a study with McKinsey that looked at what are the potentials to expand water credit into different adjacencies like commercial finance, like utilities, and so on. And the projections there are that we could push into these other areas, and that could basically get water to 100 million people, you know, between now and 2020. So I think we need to continue to look at not just us, but how do we help spur, you know, other institutions to take this on with this access to finance? That's going to be key. That's what's really going to get most people lifted out of water poverty is getting access to the tools financially that they need, not that magic filtration device or silver bullet. Then I think we do have to build onto that with this concept of accountability and transparency in helping every citizen in the developing world find their voice to hold their governments accountable, again, in the same way that it was with the Arab Spring. The fact is that more people in the world now have access to cell phones than toilets. I mean, we can use the power of communication and technology and information dispersion to help everybody become more empowered to then find their voice with respect to meeting their water and sanitation needs. So I think it has to continue to be around capital, it has to continue to be around accountability and transparency. And we, as institutions and organizations, just need to figure out how, again, we can nudge things a little bit so that people start tapping into their own intrinsic power to solve these problems rather than the top down. Just to give an example, it's going to take, according to an estimate that just came out, about $200 billion a year invested in water and sanitation if we want to get access to everyone in the world in the next 5 years. Right now, there's about $9 billion coming from the top down. Right? It's a drop in the bucket. It's not going to come from more and more of the lobbying and kind of these big international development investments. The lion's share of that is going to come from the bottom up, and the sooner we can help people exert that capital into the system, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah.
For John, innovation, entrepreneurship, and social responsibility, how are they intertwined? How are they distinct in corporate life? And where do you see it going?
Intrapreneurship?
Yeah.
That's a word I haven't heard for a while. So, intrapreneurship was a term coined by Gifford Pinchot to describe essentially the internal corporate entrepreneur. And your question is, how do these all kind of potentially weave together, or how are they different? Well, and social, did you say social innovation or social entrepreneurship?
Social responsibility.
Social responsibility. Yeah, I mean, this whole notion of social innovation, which bundles a bit of the social responsibility agenda, is another murky definitional field, right? So if you look at the Office of Social Innovation in the White House, they have a very specific flavor of what they mean, which borrows from the president's focus on community organizing and good projects at a grassroots level. If you go to the UK, to Nesta, which is the lavishly funded UK, recently privatized NGO that works on innovation policy and programs for the UK, social innovation means something completely different and is about taking all of the hard skills learned from the corporate sector, design thinking, et cetera, and applying them to hard societal problems, but in a much more pervasive kind of way. So I think part of what's important is to just be clear about terms. The entrepreneur meme is really a rebaking of a core idea that comes out of the product development literature. So, if you think about, well, where did innovations make its first appearance in business and in the business literature? It kind of begins to show up. I mean, after Taylorism and the Industrial Revolution and innovations around productivity, it really shows up in the product development literature, right? Because then you have the dreaded product development funnel and so forth and so on, all of these kind of models of how, product development is supposed to work. But the key element for our discussion is that there was this notion of the heavyweight champion. So somebody, in other words, if you wanted innovation inside a company, you had to anoint somebody as the 80-ton gorilla who could basically smash through obstacles and be obstinate and a little bit, kind of countercultural, and by force of personality would push things through. They didn't necessarily have to be creative, okay? And this is where, innovation and entrepreneurship are really, can be quite different. The person who owns 100 McDonald's franchises is a very happy entrepreneur, but they're not particularly creative, right? Or creativity didn't infuse their business success as an entrepreneur. Sometimes you get people who are both creative and entrepreneurial, right? I mean, we can think of many examples, but they're not necessarily entwined together. So the intrapreneur may be an agent for innovation, but not necessarily be innovative themselves. They're more like an internal entrepreneur that kind of drives things forward. And then you have to get into the whole question of, what's the game board for innovation within that organization. The final point I'll just make is that, interestingly enough, some companies have merged the kind of social innovation, corporate social responsibility agenda with the innovation agenda. So, I mean, from an organizational perspective, Nike would be a great example of that, where they used to have a sustainability team and an innovation team, and now they just have one team.
Another great example is Levi's, right? They've merged together this whole concept of helping with water supply in developing countries with using less water in their operations. And so now they have waterless jeans, right? It fits really well to CSR, and then they partnered with us to be able to use the philanthropic capital that they have to reach people living in poverty with water and sanitation.
Yeah.
So both of you are doing such interesting work, but we all have to report to somebody. I guess.
We do?
I guess.
Says who?
And so one of the difficulties with innovation today is ROI measurement. And so I'd like to know how each of you are innovating on ROI measurements.
So when you say ROI, do you mean return on innovation or return on
Return on
investment?
investment.
Yeah, I have
some opinions.
Something left to my mind right away I can talk about that really, what's different about us in terms of how we look at return on investment. Obviously, it's social impact return on financial investment that we're looking for. And so that can be a really easy way out, right? I mean, that's part of the challenge with the nonprofit sector is that it's social impact. So how do you put a dollar value on somebody getting an ARV or somebody getting, a water tap or whatever? One of the things that we're looking at is not just how much does it cost to get someone safe water or toilet, but where do those funds come from? And so what we look at is philanthropic costs per person reached. And that is what drives innovation in us. So the typical approach with most nonprofits with water and sanitation is that the philanthropic cost equals the total cost to reach somebody with safe water and sanitation. A lot of times there is community buy-in, the community will put in a certain percentage and so on, and that's good. But what we look at is how do we use philanthropic capital to correct market failures so that that leverages commercial capital into the space. And so with our work in India, we went from, with the first grant that we had from the foundation, where we said it's going to cost us $36 in philanthropic capital to reach each person with water or sanitation. Because of the microfinance effect in bringing in commercial capital, we came in at $24 of philanthropic capital per person reached. And now in this most current grant that we have, we'll reach 800,000 people with water for $8 million. So we've driven that down to about $10 in philanthropic capital. Now, it still costs a whole lot more than that, but that gap has been filled by commercial capital. So that's one of the ways we look at and how we measure ourselves with our metrics, because we know there's not going to be enough charity to get this done, so we've got to start looking at creative metrics like that.
So my comment is that metrics are important, but it depends on when you apply them. So if you're in an early stage situation or a ranked startup, or you're considering an idea, you can have ideas about return on investment, but they're going to be wrong, for likely as not. The only thing that you can say to yourself is, I am so passionate about this idea that I want to see what happens, right? So I mean, this is like Lean Startup 101 in a sense, but I just went through this myself. I raised some money in November to start a company that's focused on bringing sort of innovation and change-making skills to teenagers. The guy who funded the company, who's a professional venture capitalist, it took 15 minutes. There was no paperwork, no business plan was ever presented. I didn't present any pro formas. I just got a wire transfer for the money. And the reason for that is partly that it's premature for me to do pro formas or talk about numbers. All I can say is, hey, there are a lot of teenagers in the world. This is a big need. It's big, right? And he, to his credit, said, great, sounds really great. You have a track record. Let's go. Now, the metrics, then, if you do the time slider switch, should be applied at such time as this little embryonic venture has a scalable business model that's been proven, so that not only is there customer feedback, but there's actually a business, where people are signing up, by the hundreds of thousands, and there's e-commerce, and all these things are happening, at which point, sure, we're going to want to have analytics. But the problem with a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship pedagogy is it applies metrics and procedures at the wrong stage of development. Because mostly, it's like any venture capitalist who's a for real venture capitalist knows that, if you get a business plan for a ranked startup, it's a waste of time to read it. I mean, you might want to get a one-pager, or you might want to get the pitch and find out what it's about, decide if you're interested or not. But the idea of writing a 60-page telephone book-sized business plan, for the most part, is almost an irrelevancy. What matters is it a big idea? Is it a great team? And do you feel it? Are you passionate about it? That's about all you've got in the way of data. So there's no way to calculate ROI. And I think this is the problem with the venture investing process in most places outside of Silicon Valley, New York, this area, and others, which is the people who are making investments are investment bankers. They're people from public sector finance institutions, and they don't necessarily, and so they want business plans and show me the 5-year pro formas and stuff like that. And so think about the ventures they do get, think about the ventures they don't get, and then ask yourself, why are entrepreneurs around the world flocking to the San Francisco Bay Area? I mean, it's still pretty remarkable.
Yeah, but when you go back next year for double the money, what are you going to say to them is the reason that they should give you double the money?
I would ask for more than double. I mean, we're going to need to really scale up. Well, so one of the, again, one of the principles of this kind of startup to emerging growth company is proving your hypothesis, right? And so, entrepreneurs often start with 10 different great ideas bundled into this headline around this is the business, and ultimately focus is important. So thinking about what the provable hypothesis is, and then coming back with data. So the data could be testimonials from customers. It could be setting up a little pilot and seeing what the uptake is, right? So at a certain point, you want to go from emotion to evidence. But evidence still is not the same thing as having a scalable business model, right? So you go from seed round, which is, pie in the sky, hey, you want some money, you're good, I'll give you some money, to, okay, there's some confirming evidence and you've been at this for a while, so you actually have a team, there's a there, so we'll give you some Series A money, and now this is really the moonshot. I'm kind of over-stylizing it, but this is often the picture. So Series A is the moonshot money. So it's like, we're gonna give you real money now, real team, real scaling up, and the rocket is either gonna leave the launch pad or it's gonna crash and burn, right? And then we'll get to metrics. Because then we're gonna wanna have board meetings where we're gonna wanna see, what the revenue, the dynamics around revenue and the cost structure and all that kind of stuff, and you better be ready for that. But we're not gonna bug you about that for quite a while. That would be a great investment.
See, this is fascinating for me because so much kind of structure and thinking has kind of infused the whole venture capital space, right? And that has led to tremendous, return on investment for lots of companies, and it's led a lot to crash and burn, which is like part of the whole process. It's all part of the healthy process. And then you move over to the social sector, the nonprofit sector, and it's like a wasteland. It is so hard to find nonprofits, NGOs that actually invest in R&D, right? It's just so hard to get that kind of funding. And it's a shame, right? Because we need to, put as much effort into finding the solution to the global water crisis as we do inventing the next generation of the smartphone. And yet we have a structure in the social space that's completely foreign to that. And I think that's a shame. And I think that's really, I feel fortunate that we've been able to kind of start to bridge that gap. That was the whole concept of the New Ventures Fund, is get philanthropic capital in there that is risk-taking capital, so you don't have to wait 18 months to green light a new concept. You then have the ability to own your own future in terms of what you as experts in the space see as that next big innovation and go fund it. And I think the more we can get that concept, I wish everybody like water.org that had a proven track record could then go and raise a new ventures fund like we've done.
Well, or another way of looking at this, and I would be, I'll make the suggestion and see whether it falls on fertile ground or not, is there's no reason why one couldn't imagine raising a large social venture fund, like $1 billion fund. Talk to Klaus Schwab, talk to whomever, and say, well, exactly what we're saying here, which is that the innovation in the social space requires critical mass, it requires scale, and it requires a reasonable failure rate, because that is the way the innovation process works, and that, it's the same problem we were talking about earlier in terms of fragmentation and specialization, which is, let's say that you're really successful and raise, I don't even know what the number is, but, $50 million for a water fund, right? And then there's, $50 million over here for a kind of e-education thing, and a $50 million fund here for, conflict resolution and, things of that nature, and it's little pieces, right? You need, the reason that venture capital works, to the extent it works, and the model is not, super healthy, but it still works, is that you have a lot of at-bats, and so you can tolerate a certain failure rate, you can try things out, and you can also build expertise in sectors. So venture capitalists, are smart people usually, and they're on a learning curve. So if you invest in 10 ventures in social media or 10 ventures in e-education, chances are you're going to learn something about that field, which makes you a better investor with the 11, right? And it also is based on having a lot of money so that you can afford to have at-bats. Now, what would be the equivalent of that in the social sector, and why couldn't it be done? I think, the time is right.
So I'm going to take the last question, which is one we have at our events frequently. I've already asked John this once, so I'll let him go second. But there's students here, many of whom have ideas and dreams about influencing the world the way the two of you have. What's your advice to them about this uncertain but exciting world that they're leaving college or graduate school to go into?
I guess, first of all, I think it's such a more exciting time to be able to come into this and so many more opportunities available than it was, 2 decades ago. So I think, first of all, be optimistic that you can really change the world. And, what are the secret ingredients to that? Well, it's really hard to kind of sum it all up. But I think, first of all, look really hard at what the problem is that you're trying to solve. And find out, if you're passionate about it. I mean, I don't know who said it, but the saying is that, your life should be about finding the intersection of your greatest passion and the world's greatest need. And I think that's the first step, because once you have that passion, and once there really is a real need that's not being addressed, and then you combine that with hard work and being incredibly tenacious about solving that problem. So you've got to really believe that problem needs to be solved, and you're the one to solve it. You got to believe that more than anybody else in the world, that that's what you're called to do. And then, as I said earlier to the students, you don't have to be, whip smart to do it, right? I think that if you're half smart like me, then you can kind of go out and make it happen if you combine all of those other ingredients with it, and you can really change the world.
So I think, first of all, I would say that the world is turbulent and uncertain, and it's not going to change in a more kind of less turbulent and more certain direction anytime soon. Even the notion of the career path is kind of up for review. Who knows what the employment landscape is going to be like in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So, point number one is embrace it, because that's the way it is. And don't try to have it be something that it's not. The life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company now is steadily declining. It's much less than good than people. And so, the kind of stability that our parents or our grandparents might have been used to expecting, if they did a good job, so to speak, isn't around anymore. The second thing is, clearly a sense of purpose. And, the entrepreneurial path, we talked about this a little this afternoon, allows you to look in a mirror and kind of figure out who you are, what you care about the most, what the obstacles are to your expressing those passionate interests, and then working hard to overcome them. So nothing in a way could be more satisfying or fulfilling or intimate, in terms of a personal journey of sorts. And what that really means is that it's an invitation to improvise. So I'm interested in music, and it used to be that somebody could compose sheet music and put it in front of you, and you would play it like a Mozart sonata, and if you played it really well, it would sound really nice. But that model, of somebody composing the sheet music for you and you playing it, and that being, the end of it, I think is giving way to this notion that, you've got to improvise. And improvisation doesn't mean doing whatever you want, but it means having a certain agility and flexibility, which, by the way, also comes from this notion of T-shaped skills and mashed up skills. And so, the final piece of advice I would give is, try to pick up diverse bodies of knowledge and diverse skills, because you don't know exactly what you're going to need. But if you can have an interesting conversation among the things that you've learned, which might be quite divergent, it will equip you to deal in a world which values that kind of divergence and uses that as, the engine for innovation.
Well, let's thank John and Gary for a